Welcome to the RSP-Campus to Canton podcast. Felix Sharpe joining us once again. I'm Matt Waldman, and we're going to talk about Isaac Brown of Louisville, who made my Miami Hurricanes look like Swiss cheese, apparently. Nick Marsh, we're going to talk a little bit about. Some thoughts about Carson Beck, and some thoughts about Anthony Richardson, an upcoming gut check feature that I have tomorrow out of Football Guys. So, Felix, who do you want to start with? Do you want to start with your Louisville guy?
I want to start with my Louisville guy, Isaac Brown, 5'9", 195 pounds, out of Homestead, Florida. You mentioned his game against Miami. I actually went to that game. I went with my son. But yeah, he's leading the team in carries, or he's led the team in carries in each of the last 4 games. On the season, he has 68 carries for 564 yards, 20 receptions for 115 yards. And again, averaging 8.3 per carry. And it's not like Louisville's backfield doesn't have some upperclassmen who are expected to play large roles this year. Maurice Turner is hurt. Don Chaney is a transfer from your Miami Hurricanes, who's still in the backfield there. But Isaac Brown has just been, dynamic in both the rushing game and in the receiving game. He leads all freshmen. This is true freshmen. All freshmen in rushing yards. And he's just been a dynamic one-step speedster, winning on outside zone and what looks to me like inside zone, but sometimes I have a hard time diagnosing that. But it looks like moving forward, he's going to be the centerpiece of Brian Brom's offense, and Coach Brom has been, has had some prolific offenses. As we were sitting there at the game, my son, who's not a big football fan, Louisville had a big turnover where they ended up, around the Miami 30-yard line or so. And I said, so what you do now is, you go play action and you go to the end zone. And they said set hut, they ran some play action play and had Isaac Brown coming out of the backfield on some sort of wheel route. Now the pass was incomplete, but they did exactly what I expected them to do, because that's what you do after a big turnover. Sometimes we have these players flash, and he's a 3-star prospect, right? So not somebody that, at least the legacy recruiting services were expecting big things out of him, and is a little bit undersized at 195 pounds, but he's still got 3 more years or 2 more years to get to that, 200-pound threshold. And we've seen had some successful smaller running backs here recently. Jahmyr Gibbs is one. Now he's a different animal and completely. Bucky Irving, though, for the Buccaneers, and we have to, in campus to Canton leagues, you have to scoop up players like this, because you never know where their trajectory will take them. Speaking of that Bucs backfield, Sean Tucker was one of these guys. At one point at Syracuse, where he flashed as a true freshman. You're like, is this guy gonna make it? So yeah, Isaac Brown out of Louisville. He's like number 25 for a team that can really put up some points. So I would pay attention to him. I would pay attention to this little scat back. Now, you're not going to like him because he gets to a secondary player and they can just take him down to the ground. But
that's okay. But, that's the same with Bucky Irving, though he's a little more slippery. Sure.
But he's somebody that we got to watch how he develops, especially given how well he's performed this year. I mean, 20 receptions on the season after not being the starter, 500, nearly 600 yards through a couple of games. And they were doing a rotation between backs earlier in the season. Now it's pretty much exclusively Isaac Brown. So pay attention to the true freshman, number 25 from Homestead, Florida.
It sounds like he's picked up the game really fast. I mean, and that's awesome. I mean, that's such a great sign with a skill player. And I know that people who look at the data, they want breakout age at an early breakout age, which usually indicates that a player has a good shot at being a good NFL player, because especially at positions where there's competition for touches. So if you start early and break out early, that means that you probably beat some upperclassmen to get that role, and that to them is an indicator of talent. Now, I think there's some correlations to that makes sense. So That's a great pick. What about Nick Marsh?
Nick Marsh, Michigan State. Now, for some context, Michigan State is installing a new head coach this year. Jonathan Smith, who is DJ Uiagalele's head coach at Oregon State, and I think he's the part of the reason why people believe that he could have success at Florida State after transferring a second time. Anyway, Jonathan Smith is now the head coach at Michigan State. Aiden Childs, a friend of Campus to Canton, we've interviewed him. He transferred from Oregon State to go to Michigan State with him. Now, when we love Jonathan Smith, we do as an offensive play caller and getting guys open, but we did not like the situation at Michigan State. Like, who is Aiden Childs going to throw to? Now, his tight end, Jack Velling, also transferred from Oregon State to be there in East Lansing. But when we were looking at this team preseason, it was looking dire. It was looking dire. And as a matter of fact, I moved Aiden Childs down in my rankings just because of it didn't seem to have the skill position players. Well, Nick Marsh from Detroit, Michigan, River Rouge High School has really emerged. He was a 4-star prospect in last year's class, 6'3", 205, in an upset win, or what I think was an upset win against Iowa. He had 8 receptions for 113 yards. He's got 2 games with over 100 yards receiving this year, including that Iowa game. He also went for 8 for 194 against Maryland and a touchdown. And he, is obviously a bigger player, not necessarily a speed guy, but in that Maryland game, got behind the defense, got behind the defense twice on post routes, and but really is a guy that kind of excels on slants, comebacks, hitches, posts, outs, that sort of thing. A very simple route tree, but he's just been reliable. I mean, and that's that. Oh, he's been reliable, and he's been the boundary receiver for Aiden Childs. I think that's a big deal because you're putting a true freshman in the boundary. That means he's your number one, and they have upperclassmen on that team that they could now not the same size or physical makeup of Nick Marsh, but they have other guys. So he's been the boundary receiver, or often lining up in the boundary. And he's 3rd in the country amongst freshmen. The only 2 players that have more yards than him, 24 receptions, 433 yards, and that 1 touchdown against Maryland. The only 2 players that have more yards than him at freshman are Jeremiah Smith and Ryan Williams. So he's in very good company because those 2 are becoming, superstars in their own right, in Smith and Marsh and Smith and Williams. It reminds me very much of when Keon Coleman kind of came onto the scene for Michigan State. And we had kind of known about Keon Coleman because he was one of these guys that played both basketball and football at Michigan State, and those guys just they're kind of guys that we put a note next to. And so when Keon Coleman broke, I'm like, I don't know. This is it's kind of a sluggish offense. He's kind of playing well. All right, we just got to go pick him up. And I think that's the case with Nick Marsh. I think that if he's out there in your Campus to Canton League, you just got to draft him, go pick him up off the waiver wire because you don't want him to be in the freshman player pool next year. You want to have somebody like that rostered. So Aiden Childs is a very good player, dual threat quarterback with a great offensive play caller in a rebuilding program. And for the foreseeable future, Nick Marsh is going to be his number 1 wide receiver. So go ahead, pay attention. He's number 6, River Rouge High School, Detroit, Michigan. Pay attention to Nick Marsh there for the Spartans.
Good advice there. And listen, you've heard about Campus to Canton. If you haven't tried a Campus to Canton league, you got to play both sides here. You get the college game, you get the pro game. Your players matriculate from the college roster that you've picked and drafted and traded for and built, and they move over to your NFL roster. So you get to play Saturday and Sunday, and Monday, Tuesday, and if they add Wednesday and whatever the NFL decides to do.
They're playing right now as we talk, actually, Matt. So
right,
that's the year.
So pretty much you can be involved every day of the week watching your players. It's a fantastic format at campustocanton.com.
If I could just add one note on
Please.
that, I think the thing that's most rewarding or that really gets you excited, and we record both this program and a program that goes on the Campus to Canton NIL podcast feed, where you have to be an NIL member to listen to it. And Matt talked about Ashton Genty. Ashton Jeanty at Boise State, who just might break Barry Sanders' rushing record there at Oklahoma State. Ashton Jeanty was a 3-star prospect that was like running back 80-something according to the recruiting services, the legacy recruiting services. He was our running back 16. We liked him so much that we interviewed him. We're like, we have to figure out this guy. You know, he played football in Italy overseas before coming back to Texas. He actually, I have his phone number in my phone because he wanted to do some podcasting stuff. So for a player like that, you know, to go from 3-star to probably going to be there in New York for the Heisman Trophy ceremony, to probably going to be the first running back taken, if not one of the first couple of running backs taken, who was like an afterthought as far as legacy recruiting goes. It's just really weird. So finding players like that, like Quinshawn Judkins, who was also a 3-star prospect, like Aiden Childs, who was a lower rated prospect, Anthony Richardson, who you're going to talk about later on, was not, you know, the top quarterback in his class. It's really satisfying to, you know, get these players on your roster and kind of watch them bloom and develop over time and become basically like household names in the fantasy and fantasy football community.
Yeah, without a doubt. And it's an exciting format for sure. And, you know, Felix and his team deliver a lot of great information and give you a lot of fun content in addition to the league format. I do have a suggestion for you if you have Ashton Jeanty's phone number. I would say this: if he hasn't seen the much made to do about how he stands in the backfield and he looks like Michael Myers from Halloween, I would strongly suggest texting him and seeing if you told him that maybe in a practice before, like in a warm-up before a game, see if you can guys send him like a William Shatner mask like in Halloween and have him on before the Halloween game, you know, where he's practicing, like stand there looking like Michael Myers like that, because there's lots of memes of him looking like.
I had not heard that.
Yeah,
I had not heard that.
There's a meme going around that says Ashton Jeanty stands like Michael Myers in Halloween before he gets the football. You know, yeah, I'm sure you can find it like 24/7 or one of those, you know, high click rated design websites, and I think you can probably find that there. So if you got his number, he might have a little fun with that because he could play off that. Fans would love that. Would love that.
I got you.
Yeah. But if I had it, I'd probably just send him one and say, dude, you got to wear this before in warm-ups before a game, just to, you know, if your coach is okay with it, you know. But yeah, no. So before we go to Richardson, you know, let's talk a little bit about Carson Beck. Maybe let's talk a little bit about that Texas game, because I just watched the kind of the breakdown highlights of, you know, that ESPN had to offer with it, because I was just curious about this meeting after Georgia lost the Alabama game, and then Alabama got upset. And my feeling was, just from a narrative perspective, I thought, this sounds like a situation where Georgia's defense is like, we're not going to let this offense screw up our chance to redeem ourselves. We're not going to let anybody. The defense was going to not let Georgia's offense lose this game for them. Did that kind of happen in this contest? What do you think?
Well, I mean, the defense definitely carried them. I mean, Carson Beck threw 3 interceptions in this game, but if you watch those 3, one was over the middle on, you know, an in-breaking route, and I would be concerned if you didn't see like the secondary player there or the zone defender there. But I think that Carson Beck was just listen. He lost Ladd McConkey and Brock Bowers.
Right. Yeah.
They didn't replace those guys. You got a first-round pick and a second-round NFL draft pick. I think the consensus is that he's falling behind Cam Ward and Shedeur Sanders, but both of those guys might
weapons.
Have the two best wide receiver cores in the country. By the way, Matt, you know, like Georgia runs the ball, or traditionally has run the ball.
Yeah.
They are throwing the ball a ton and are relying on Carson Beck a ton. But anyway, the three interceptions in that game, one was he's just forcing it over the middle. The second was a tip pass, which he could have been a little bit more accurate to the tight end, Oscar Delp. The third was the one that got the highlights because they threw the ball or they threw the stuff on the field where it looked to me like he was throwing a back shoulder there, and the receiver just didn't ran more of like a traditional like hitch route and not prepared for the back shoulder fade, because the cornerback actually caught it on the outside of the receiver anyway. And that could be if leverage is different, you could be the wide receiver may have
made the play, and it wouldn't have had to have been an interference call. Yeah.
But yeah, like he listen, Carson Beck is still an aggressive downfield passer who, for pocket passers, improvising isn't like what Anthony Richardson or Lamar Jackson does. It could be stepping up in the pocket and finding that second or third read. He still does that well, at least in my opinion. And he can literally throw to every portion of the field. He just doesn't have Brock Bowers or Lad McConkey, these guys that are open. So, I actually am going to try to trade for him in some leagues after, he completed only 56% of his passes in that game against Texas, 3 interceptions. He's got 8 interceptions on the season. But I think it's just because, to be honest with you, I like the fact that Matthew Stafford had this, where he would throw an interception and it's like it never even happened. He would keep gunning it down the field. I think Carson Beck is built the same way. He throws an interception, it doesn't faze him really at all. And he doesn't become like check down Charlie. He is still throwing the ball aggressively downfield. So, after one of his worst performances on the season, I would still go and get this guy. And I'm still very high on him. I was high on him coming into last season. I had him in the top 15 of my rankings, and that was supposed to be crazy. He ended up becoming my number 1 quarterback last year. I still have him very, very high. I think I still have him as my number 1 quarterback. So that's my thought on Carson Beck. This is a guy who's being the same player that he was last year. He just doesn't have the same talent that he had last year.
And I think that that probably aids. The fact that you were a cornerback or a defensive back probably aids a little bit. Also, I think that filters into your analysis nicely, because there's a difference between narrative and there's a difference of what defenders see on the field when a quarterback is on the field and certain things happen in a game. And when you realize that with a quarterback, if you're realizing that he's not backing down, he's still taking his shots and he's still going aggressive, that's a great sign, because there are guys who lose their edge when things go wrong. And so either their game completely falls apart, like Jordan Love used to be, his game would fall apart. He'd just get even more erratic when he made a mistake trying to double down. Or Zach Wilson would just be blind about what some of the things that he did. But then, then when you look at someone like Lamar Jackson was someone that he made a mistake and he just went and he just shook it off. It wasn't, he could have a bad day and he still didn't go into a hole. It just was, things happened. He kept trying. And I think you're right about you say that about Stafford, for sure true. So with Beck, that's an encouraging sign for sure. We'll end the show, just kind of wrap it up. I got a gut check coming out tomorrow. It's probably one of the easiest articles I've written in about the past 10 years on Anthony Richardson. People were asking about, should they be worried about Anthony Richardson? And I'll just say this. I watched the film, and I didn't put one bit of film into the article because I didn't need to. What I did put instead was I compared his stats to 3 different players who I won't share who they are, so that you kind of get a chance to see what they are. But I will say that they have multiple MVPs and conference championship appearances between them, and they've played about 25 years worth of football at this point. So you can see where they were in their first 9 games of their career versus where Anthony Richardson is in all sorts of categories, as well as where they are now in terms of their career production and how that's improved or declined. And I think some of the things will surprise you of who they are and how their careers kind of went after those first 9 games. And Anthony Richardson's right there. You would not, honestly, you would not know the difference between him and those other 3 players who are now, or at one time or now are the it factors in the NFL at the quarterback position. So I would just say to you, go check it out. And my advice to you is, if you have him in redraft, don't get rid of him. He's faced a lot of difficult defenses this year so far. If you look at stinginess to fantasy quarterbacks, and it's about to get probably easier more often than not. And if you're in Dynasty, if someone's foolish enough to sell him right now, take him every chance you can get, because the only worry you have to have is injury. And the 3 players I compared him to, everyone was hand-wringing about them being injured, and they still do hand-wring about them getting injured. And they tend to be pretty healthy, maybe missing a game or 2 here and there, but that's about it. So, yeah, I would say to you, the narratives about Anthony Richardson are just that, even if they're people, even when it comes from a film standpoint. Because if I'm not showing you film in an article and telling you I don't need to show it to you, I would say that that's a pretty good indicator of a couple of things. And one of the things is that the player's doing just fine for the trajectory that he's on. He's making mistakes, but they're nothing that you should be majorly concerned about. Now, you're going to have some people, maybe even former quarterbacks, telling you that there's reason for concern, but they're also trying to get clicks on their channel. And they may also, and maybe it's not that nefarious or like superficial. It's also that they don't have experience evaluating players from a long-term perspective. And so if they can tell me what literally has a really true, tried and true data track record of what's good or bad for future development potential based on what they're seeing right now, I'd like to see what that is and see the data on it, because I don't think most people, when they start talking about film and going, well, ooh, this is a bad sign for development, usually they're wrong. Usually they don't really know. They just know what was a good play and what was a bad play, and anecdotally what they've seen in some instances. But we saw that hand-wringing on film about the 3 other players that I mentioned, and they all did just fine. I'll just put it that way. So yeah, Richardson is one of those players that he's going to get the extra scrutiny because of the lack of experience that he's had. And like I've said, he's not raw, he's inexperienced. There is a nuanced difference. Some people are just maybe not exact with their words when it comes to that, and they may mean the same thing as I do. And then there's some people who I just think he's raw, and I think they're wrong. And I think he's going to wind up proving that. In the same way people thought Lamar Jackson was raw, and I thought he was the most advanced pocket passer in that class. So, stay tuned for that. That'll be out tomorrow afternoon. And listen again, go check out campuscanton.com. Felix's fine work and his team's fine work. Of course, you can find us here at any outlet that you download podcasts, and we'll be on in a couple weeks. And see you later.